Today on Inspired Money.
I work my ass off. I'm competitive. We're creative. I've surrounded myself with really quality, good people. I've trained them. I try to lead them. I try to treat them with respect. And if all of those things create $5 or $6 or $7 million one year and really good profits or a number of years, I'm apologizing to nobody for that. I am working every day to be exceptional, and I want everybody around me to be exceptional. So if that exceptionalism at work allows me to do more for my society and also buy my wife a house on the beach, I'm not going to apologize for that. I think all of that is fine. But I'm also saying it can't be just about that.
This is episode 121 with entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and football coach, Bill Courtney. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Do you like a good underdog story? I've got a great one for you today. Two unknown LA filmmakers pack up and move to Memphis to make a documentary about a struggling high school football team. Directors Dan Lindsay and TJ Martin believed that they had a story worth capturing, and after showing some edited footage around Hollywood, were able to secure financing for the film. Over 2 years later, their hard work that included going through over 500 hours of footage to edit, their hard work paid off. Here's a clip from the 2012 Academy Awards.
And the Oscar goes to Undefeated, TJ Martin, Dan Lindsay, and Rich Middlemas.
So that was Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow announcing the category for Best Documentary. Today we're talking to Coach Bill Courtney, the central character of the film Undefeated. He volunteered 6 years of his life, dedicating his time and energy to coaching inner-city school Manassas High. He's an extraordinary coach. Surprisingly, I'm not going to talk about football today. I want you to go watch the movie. It's called Undefeated, it's great, and it's available on Netflix. Check this out.
Anybody can be a champ. It takes a man to stand up when this thing hits you in the mouth because it hurts. The character of a man is not measured in how he handles his wins, but what he does with his failures. And tonight, we failed. And everybody says, when you get these inner city kids down, they'll lay over and you'll beat them by 40. Not us. Everybody will say they're 0-1. They're going to fold up camp. They'll be 2-8 by the end of this thing. No! Not us. You walk with your chins up. I am proud to be a Manassas Tiger on this field night because my guys did lay down. They got heart. Now let's put our mind with our heart and our bodies and let's finish this thing this year. This is an unbelievably good opportunity. You're down 20-0. You come back from that, now you're talking about something.
1:03 to go. Season comes to a close for somebody here tonight.
You think football builds character. It does not.
He's going to throw it. He pulls the trigger.
Football reveals character.
This is it! Let's go!
In this episode, you'll learn the traditional values and straight talk that make Bill a great coach and business leader. You'll learn about his $50 million business and what the current trade war is doing to American manufacturers. And you'll hear about the importance of service, why if you're not giving and trying to help society and your community, Bill thinks your life is not full. Now let's get inspired with Coach Bill Courtney. Bill, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks. Excited to be with you.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
When I was 9, at the time in Memphis, there were two newspapers. One was the morning paper, the Commercial Appeal. The other was the evening paper, which is the Memphis Press-Scimitar. And it had to be on doorsteps by 6:30. And so whatever sport I was playing at the time, practice ended at 5:30, and I'd ride my bike home from school. The way paper routes were done is you had your route, and the publisher's truck would drop all the papers off at your house. So I'd get home about 5:45, wrap the papers and put them in my satchel and get on my bike and go throw them. And so that was a paper route. But the money side of it was they would give you a $7 bonus for every new customer you would get. And back then you didn't pay the newspaper, you actually paid the carrier. So I quickly found out that you could make tips. On like my second weekend of it, I went knocking on doors all Saturday and all Sunday after church and got like 50 new customers, which equated to back then $350 at $7 each, which was huge. And then I found out that many customers wanted their paper rather than just thrown on their doorstep. They wanted it in a basket, or they wanted it put inside their screen door or whatever. And so the following weekend, I went and knocked on all of my existing customers' doors and said, how's your service? And I'm 9. How's your service? Where do you want the paper? Is it okay? Are you pleased with the way it's received, or would you rather me put it somewhere special for you? I'm happy to do it. And all of a sudden, I started getting lots of tips. I started with a route that had 70 or so, it's a long time ago, but around 70 people on my route, which took me about an hour and a half. And I grew it to about 300, which means I was throwing papers for 3.5 hours a night. And I ended up having to quit and turn my route over to someone else who could handle that volume, because I just couldn't do it anymore. So the three things I learned about that was sales and the value of commissions and the value of creating your own money. The second is I had to have a checking account because I had to pay for my papers, and then I had to receive. So I actually learned a little bit about payables. I learned a little bit about receivables and balancing a checkbook. And then the third thing I learned was this: you need to be prepared for growth, because oftentimes if you don't have the framework to handle the growth can kill you. And it did me at 9 years old in my paper route, this thing I had to build that I had to turn over. So a really valuable lesson.
That's a lot of lessons for a 9-year-old. And just as you were saying at the end there, the only thing missing was that you needed to hire a staff of like 2 or 3 assistants to help you working below you.
Yeah. I mean, I ended up turning it over to like a 23-year-old guy with a car, because you had to have a car to handle that many newspapers and handle that many customers. It ended up being the largest route the press center had. So anyway, I learned a lot from that. So who knew, from being a little paper boy.
Bill, you talk very openly about your dad not being around when you were growing up. What was life like growing up in Memphis for you and your mom?
Memphis is the biggest little town in the country. There's a little over 1 million folks in Memphis and the suburbs, but it's very prototypical Southern in terms of friendliness and people knowing each other and saying hello when you're on the sidewalk and holding the doors for one another. It's still very old Southern hospitality town that has 1 million people in it. Growing up in Memphis, many of the relationships I have in this city were formed back when I was a kid, because people just knew each other, and neighbors still to this day congregate in the front yards and have parades on July 4th in the neighborhood with kids and wagons and stuff. It's still got all of that going on. And it really was a great place to grow up. Now, with regard to my father, I mean, he and mom were divorced when I was 4, and there was very little interaction relationship. So not with regard to Memphis, but just growing up in particular, as I started to get into my adolescence, and was going to school with friends who had fathers that were at games and fathers that were doing Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and Webelos and all of the things that you do, I started to wonder what was wrong with me. Why doesn't my dad want to be around me? What was wrong with me? And so in an odd way, it spawned a lot of the work that I did and a lot of the things I involved myself in because I was constantly trying to prove myself worthy. I think hoping that maybe my dad would want to be around me. I speak nationally all over the place, and even if it's at Nike, just about every speech that I do and the book that I wrote and the book that I'm writing and in the movie, even as a 50-year-old man, I think I am still, even subconsciously, still driven a lot by my early childhood reality that was I always wanted to be accepted. And so I worked extra hard to do things for acceptance of a man who I always thought it was me. And it took me a long time to realize it was not me, it was him.
So you think sometimes, even today, some of the things that you're doing subconsciously, it's like to get the approval of your dad who wasn't there versus just doing it for yourself?
I would say about 10 years ago, I finally dropped that. But yeah, well into adulthood. I mean, the irony is, you're successful in college, you're successful in business, you're successful as a father and as a husband to whatever degree of success you can have. I don't mean me particularly, but in just whatever successes I've had. I mean, the irony of it is I would still wake up when it was just me in the mirror and wonder, was it enough? Did I work hard enough to warrant love from a man who was never going to love me? I think, when you talk about things like commitment and basic tenets in the world, and oftentimes people think of commitment as to showing up on time or doing what you say you're going to do at work, or not telling somebody you're going to do something and not doing it and everything else. But in my world, commitment is so much deeper, because when you have a child, you have made a lifelong commitment to not just the nurture, but certainly the nurture, but you've got to be present. And that lack of presence affected me in a way that was profound, but in an odd, ironic way, it also drove me to do many of the things that have been successful in my life.
Yeah, it sounds like you took that and channeled it into a very positive energy.
Tried to, but trust me, there was a lot of negative that went along with it as well.
Bill, the movie Undefeated and then your book Against the Grain, there are so many valuable lessons in both. I feel like it's your good character that can explain some of your life's crazy adventures. Where did that come from? Did that come from your mom? When
you're young and you don't have a dad around and you get that. And I was I was pretty athletic and played a bunch of sports and stuff. And so I guess what I'm saying is I got a lot of who I am from a lot of different places, because I didn't have that one singular male on a pedestal that was my dad. So I got a little piece from Ray Condor, my third grade basketball coach. I got a little piece from Zach Street, my 6th through 8th grade basketball coach. I got a little bit from Philip Spain, my football coach, and a little bit from Dale Flickinger, my chess coach, believe it or not, and all of the other mentors and coaches in between. And I think so a lot of the lessons that you see in Undefeated and you read in Against the Grain, candidly, are a canvas of all of the best of the different people I've had in my life. And so I don't know that I can even claim authorship for any of it. Rather, it's just a summary of a whole bunch of the best positives I was able to garner from all of the different people that I look to in my life for mentorship to replace what I didn't get from my own father.
It sounds like sports was important because it gave you opportunity. to be exposed to many different mentors that you could then curate the wisdom and lessons from.
No, and that's certainly right. But with regard to me, all of my teammates had that same opportunity, but they had a consistent, steady influence at home that was their primary steady influence. I didn't have that. So I used what was available. And so many of the sayings and so many of the little anecdotal quips that you hear in Undefeated and that you read in Against the Grain, I don't know that I could even recall when I heard some of that stuff, but most of it is all just a summary collection of different stuff I'd heard everywhere else that, because I didn't have a singular voice, I collected bits and pieces of other people's voice, I think, to kind of guide my ethos.
Being in Memphis, growing up in Memphis, since you talked about having this sort of small town, Southern values, that shaped you too, because I read the old values throughout your book. Yeah.
Listen, there's a few things that I've said that are probably and written that are certainly, I would claim, as mine and maybe new, but honestly, the characteristics and tenets that guide my life with my family, with my business, with my teams I coach are fundamentally the stuff that your grandmother taught you. A 30,000-foot view of the way I think is that we can be a progressive, forward-thinking, positively evolving society without abandoning the core principles that got us here in the first place. And so much of what I see in the world today that is discouraging is there's almost this mentality, the more we get divided, that old school and new school are somehow at odds with one another. And I think that's patently incorrect. I think we can be forward thinking and progressive and not abandon what got us there in the first place. And it's how are we creative to make sure we do move forward in society in a way that still honors and keeps present the core values and tenets of character and commitment and integrity and dignity and, for God's sake, civility. Growing up in Memphis and having all the many different voices and influences in my life as a kid certainly is what is the architect of that mindset.
I like that. It requires some compromise, open-mindedness, and it's easy to get away from that, I think, in today's age.
Well, and we're drug away from it in today's world, I think. Our politics and our media do it. We need to be able to have civil, non-threatening, but real conversations about the stuff that matters. And we've gotten to a level of division and political correctness that prohibit us from even being willing to say what we really feel for fear that someone will stuff us in a box that categorizes us in a way that is uncomfortable. And therefore, it's not even worth opening your mouth. And how in the world can we grow if we surround ourselves with people who just think like us, look like us, talk like us, worship like us, and feel like us? Because if you do, every conversation you have in that world is going to happen in a vacuum. There's no growth. And I spoke to a master's class at a university about a week ago, and I said in it that to be a leader in your family, to be a leader in your society, to be a leader in your business, to be a leader anywhere, you have to be liberal. And about half of the room who was conservative, I could hear them tightening up and bristling and everything else. And I smiled when I said it. And then, of course, the other half of the room that considers themselves progressive, they were like, yeah, that's right. Got to be a liberal. And I said, no, I did not say you have to be a liberal. I said you have to be liberal. And somehow the left side of center thinking, in my opinion, has kidnapped the word liberal. I think you have conservative, you have progressive, you have middle, but the word liberal is in the purest context is open-minded thought that seeks the right answers and the best solutions, regardless of preconceived notion or political slant. Let's be open-minded and liberal and look at any issue for what it is. Let's do data-driven, fact-driven research on whatever issue we're taking with a liberal, open mind, and then attack that issue with the best solutions, regardless of what side of the aisle or from what political or religious or societal slant you happen to come from. And if you can actually be civil and non-threatening and open and liberal as you attack business problems, family problems, any kind of problems, you're going to find the right answers. So to lead, you do have to be liberal, not progressive, not conservative, but liberal. And I guess what I'm saying, all of that culminates in, to me, that's the most old-fashioned of the old-fashioned tenets, is civility, willingness to have a conversation with someone who doesn't necessarily agree with you, but both of you have a liberal enough approach and an open enough a mind to consider that nobody is ever 100% right and nobody is ever 100% wrong. And somewhere in the middle is typically the right answers if we'll just put aside our preconceived notions and our ego and allow our brain to open-mindedly listen and think and consider and reach compromise and common sense solutions to issues. And I do believe at one time that was a more prevalent way of doing things. And the more divided we get in our society, the farther and farther away we get from that. And thusly, the farther and farther away we get from true leadership.
Coming up, we talk about why Bill left a well-paying job to start his business with very humble beginnings. Real consequences of the China trade war, helping your community, all that and so much more right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/121. If you're listening in your car or wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Bill and other things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. In the spirit of giving, I decided to follow Steph Fuccio's lead to review one podcast every day this month at podchaser.com. We chose Podchaser because it's accessible no matter where you are in the world, and it's independent of the device or platform that you use to listen to podcasts. It's a lot of fun. You can make a podcaster's day by leaving a review, and it doesn't cost you any money. I know that time is money, but you can write a review in just a few short minutes. The goodwill is invaluable. We're using the hashtag PodRevMo. That's PodRevMo. That stands for Podcast Review Month. I hope that you'll consider joining in on the fun. It's also that time of year where you might be thinking about donating money. I want to quickly talk about donor-advised funds. I'm bringing this up because of something that Coach Bill said to me.
There's nothing worse than a first-generation guy who kills himself building some amount of net worth, and he passes it on to the second generation, and the second generation then becomes miserly with their gift.
Most people donate through checkbook giving, meaning that you decide how much to donate, you select a charity, and then you send a payment. Often this requires writing a check. Maybe you'll process a credit card or even use a service like Venmo or PayPal. But if you want legacy, if you want to involve your kids in philanthropy and have more money conversations, the ultra wealthy like Bill and Melinda Gates, they set up a foundation, transfer money into it, have it grow, and then give money away over time. A donor-advised fund is a charitable giving program that allows even small-scale givers to put money into an account, let it mature, and then disperse it gradually. This combines the most favorable tax benefits with the flexibility to support your favorite charitable causes at virtually any time. To establish a donor-advised fund, you make an irrevocable charitable contribution to the public charity that sponsors the program. That contribution is then invested and may grow tax-free, and you're able to recommend grants to eligible public charities at any time. A donor-advised fund offers a convenient way to pass your charitable giving values onto your children or grandchildren. Having a more formalized vehicle provides young children the power to recommend charities to receive grants of $100 to $500 from the family's donor-advised account. The kids can recommend a charity that they care about based on knowledge that they've gained on their own, and it's essential to involve children in the process. Seeing mom and dad sitting down and writing checks during the holiday season, that's great, but it doesn't teach core philanthropic values. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes to a blog article if you want to learn more, or definitely reach out if you want to discuss donor-advised funds in more detail to see if it's a good solution for you. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. If you have questions about money or have a comment about this show, send me a message at inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. I'd love to hear from you. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. Leadership is central to both your resume as a business person and as a coach. You're really a self-made businessman. Can you share with us how you were able to build your lumber company, Classic American Hardwoods? Because it sounds like you built it from very little.
How about nothing? Listen, I was a football coach and a high school teacher when I graduated college, and I was a dissertation away from my doctorate. So I was working on my doctorate, and then I met Lisa, and Lisa's hot. Lisa's drop dead gorgeous, always has been, still is. And I'm this fat redheaded dude that not making any money. And so I'm like, if you ever go fishing, and for any of those of you who fish, you'll know this. For those who don't, quick explanation. You always want your line to match what you're trying to catch. In other words, you don't want 20-pound line trying to catch a 2-pound brim. You'll never feel it nibble and you can't set the hook. Conversely, you don't want to go fishing for marlin on an 8-pound test, because the minute you hit a marlin, they're going to snap and get off the line. So you always want to match the line with what you're fishing for. And so when you hook a big fish light into a slab, you'll do everything you can not to let that line break or let that fish off the hook. And that's kind of what I felt like when I married Lisa. Was I had a slab on 8-pound test. She was the slab, I was the 8-pound test. I'm like, how do I keep her around? So I didn't know what else to do. So we just started having kids, and I just kept her pregnant.
That's a strategy.
Yeah, it's a strategy. So I look up and I'm teaching school and coaching football, making $17,500 a year with no insurance. And I've got a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and she's pregnant with our 4th. Kind of lined them up, knocked them down. We got on city water and it cleared up, but it was tough for a while. And so I didn't know what to do because I wasn't making enough money. And so I ended up, and I'm still a dissertation away from my doctorate because I didn't have time to finish it, which I never have. And I couldn't make ends meet as a teacher and a coach, which was my passion, but not what I could do for a living anymore with all these kids that I had to keep my good-looking wife around. And so I went to, I started selling fleets of trucks to companies. I sold some trucks to a lumber company. The guy offered me $10,000 a year more than I was making. That was all the money in the world to me. So I quit and went and did that. Worked for his lumber company as a salesman, and ended up being the executive vice president of the company 4 years later at 30 years old, and tripled the business in the company. And I wanted some ownership. He wouldn't give it to me. And so, I went to Lisa and I said, baby, I really think I can do this. And she said, we were broke when I met you. We'd be broke again. And so I quit. And I had $16,500 in my checking account, and literally started trading loads of lumber off my couch in my living room. got some investors and bought a dilapidated piece of property in North Memphis. And it was 7 acres with one building, and the building was built in 1898 and was falling down when I bought it. Went to work, started dragging old equipment out of bushes that nobody wanted in North Carolina, and paid a little bit of cash for it, fixed it up, and went to work. And now we sit on about 50 acres, about 150 employees, and we did just over $50 million in sales last year. And have offices in Shanghai, Ho Chi Minh, of course, operating facilities and sales offices here in Memphis, and been really blessed.
It's a real success story. You've said that starting the business was one of the biggest gambles of your life. How scary was it?
It really wasn't scary for me because, my dad was gone and my mom worked hard. But, I grew up in an apartment in Memphis in just kind of a average area, and went to Ole Miss on complete scholarship. And I never had 3 jobs when I was in school. And I know what poor is, and I know what it means to live paycheck to paycheck. I know what it means to eat a mayonnaise sandwich because all you got's a little bit of mayonnaise and some bread. And it just, not having money didn't scare me back then, but it petrified me because I had 4 children. And it was my responsibility to make sure that those kids were healthy, well-fed, clothed, housed, and well-educated, and loved and nurtured and taken care of. Not spoiled, but maybe spoiled with love, but not spoiled with things, but taken care of. And the risk was not about me. It was about, I have this beautiful wife and these 4 children and this amazing family that I've been blessed with. And here I am risking my livelihood was not a big deal, but I was responsible for those 5 people. And so the risk and the fear was more about letting down my family than anything else.
So you had little to risk money-wise, but it's a big risk family.
When I left that company, I was making more money. You could probably take 4 or 5 people in my family and combine them, and I was making more money than all of them combined. I'd gotten up to the executive vice president company. There was some pretty good sized numbers on the left side of the comma. I was making a lot of money and was just bought a 4,500 square foot house. So every kid had their own bedroom in a really new, nice neighborhood. So, I'd kind of, in my world, I'd arrived. I had a wife, I had 4 kids, I had a good job, I had a couple nice cars, I had a beautiful home, everybody was taken care of, kids were in good schools, we could go on a couple vacations a year and not sweat it. And we were settling into a really nice upper middle class life. And there I am at 30 years old, where when I was a kid, was rich. People lived like I was living at 30 when I was a kid. I thought those people had it made. And here I was literally walking away from it to try to do something bigger for myself. And so I didn't have a lot of cash in the bank, but I was on my way to establishing a really nice upper middle class life that was comfortable and easy and safe. And like an idiot, I dumped on it and started this place. And I'm telling you, I'd have never done it had my wife not looked at me across the kitchen table when I told her I was thinking about it. And she looked at me and she said, "We were broke when I married you. We can be broke again. If this is your dream and this is what you want to do, I'm with you. Chase it," which is, phenomenal, because if it wasn't for her strength, I would have never done it.
Bill, how is the trade war today impacting your business?
It's exponentially worse than the Great Recession in 2008. 2008-9, the Great Recession was bad. And obviously, when you're in the lumber business and people aren't building, you got issues. My lumber is hardwood lumber. People think about lumber, they think about 2x4s and 4x6s and stuff that build a structure. Hardwood lumber is oak, cherry, ash, maple. It's the things that furnish a building. So if you think of it this way, softwoods build a structure, hardwoods furnish it. So my stuff is what makes flooring and cabinets and doors and moldings and furniture and all that. But still, if you're not building houses, you're not furnishing them. And so the Great Recession was awful. And it's when I started exporting, because there was business that you could develop for our products in Europe and in Asia really all over the world, competing with South American species, African species, Russian species, and European species. And so I had an out, which was you got to change your species mix. You got to be creative. You got to spend a lot of money traveling. You got to set up offices overseas. But there was a market to help buttress the loss of everything that the Great Recession had.
You could adjust.
Yeah, that's right. Big adjustment. But that's how we survived it. Now we are not dealing with market issues. We're not dealing with, okay, how can you be creative to offset the loss of one market and get deeper into another market or other species or other products? This is all political driven. So how do you plan 5 months ahead, a year ahead? How do you plan when you have no idea what side of the bed the president and the people in China are going to wake up on this thing? And so the reason it's exponentially worse is there's no out. So the only answer is to contract. You have to, if business, I consider business a three-legged stool. Each leg is sales, expenses, margins. If you sell enough and a margin's high enough that cover your expenses, you're going to make money. But if any of those three legs falls off, the stool falls over and you're done. Well, my sale of 42% of all the hardwood lumber made in the United States went to China over the last 5-year period. So we've lost that. So if your sales go away, 30% of your sales evaporate overnight because a bunch of politicians decide they want to get into an argument and use common folks like us as pawns. There's really nothing you can do about it. And there's no market-driven exercise or creativity you can do to offset it. So the sales are gone. So then you've got to, can I increase my margins? Well, no, because now there's a 30% contraction in the marketplace, but there's still the same level of production. So actually now your margins are shrinking as well. So the only place you can cut is expenses, and that's people and insurance and everything. And so the problem is there's no sales or margin or creative out as a result of what the trade wars have done to not only my business, but largely most manufacturing in the United States. And we're not farmers, and so there's no $8 billion bailouts for us. So by and large, unless you're Apple or Nike, who have somehow been carved out of the retaliatory tariffs, all of us mid-cap, mid-sized manufacturers spread all over the middle half of the United States are just absolutely getting pummeled. And it's scary. 19 hardwood lumber mills in the United States have shuttered and gone bankrupt in the last 90 days alone. It's terrible. And one other thing to note for your listeners, there's a misnomer. 20 years ago, 83% of the lumber sent to China was made into products that were then exported out of China. So it could be argued that 20 years ago, China was buying our raw materials, making products, and then putting the American worker out of business by, with the advent of real cheap freight and certainly their cheap labor, they could actually take our lumber, make products, and ship them back to the United States and sell them cheaper than a furniture manufacturer in the United States could. And so there was an argument 20 years ago that you could say that China's explosion in manufacturing was a detriment to American manufacturing and the worker. But in the last 5 years, China's economy has grown and the middle class has grown, that 85% of all the lumber sent to China is manufactured, made into products that are consumed by the Chinese public. And the point is, by getting locked out of China, we're not able to, the idea that if we don't ship stuff to China, more people will build factories in the United States and you'll replace the sales of the United States, that's just wrong. That's the narrative that's coming out of DC, but that's just a lie, because China has its own economy now and its own marketplace. So when we're locked out of doing business in China, we're locked out of that marketplace, and there's no replacement for those people and for that business, and therefore your business and your industry contracts. And that's what happened. That's what's happening in my business and many other American manufacturers, because they're locked out of it. And the void is being replaced by South American manufacturers, Russian manufacturers, European manufacturers, African manufacturers. So it's not like China just says, okay, well, we're not going to buy these products anymore. They just go to other markets that don't have tariffs. And therefore, American manufacturing is losing actual market share that once those supply chains are replaced, I don't know if they'll ever come back.
Yeah, it's a huge risk that it's irreparable damage.
It's a profound effect on American manufacturing. And I think just recently, American manufacturing numbers came out about 3 weeks ago, and they were way, way, way down, and people were surprised. And I'm like, why are you surprised? We're locked out of a third of the world's economy.
Wow. Yeah, powerful coming from a business leader who is in the middle of it. You see the impact of the policy every day.
Yeah, it's the narrative that the tariffs are only affecting China and killing China and not hurting Americans is a fallacy. It's a lie. Now, the tariffs are having a profound effect on Chinese economy. The Chinese economy is absolutely in the tank, and I don't care what their government and their government-run press says about their growth and their GDP, but they are most certainly in a recession right now. So if the effect of the tariffs was to cripple the Chinese economy, to bring them to the bargaining table, to right some unfair practices that have been going on, well, that works. The question is then, is the collateral damage to the American manufacturing sector, which is happening, is the loss of jobs and the loss of revenue in that sector worth what you're gaining in China? For me, because it's me personally, I'm in it, I'm starting to question it, obviously, because I can't make any money and I'm laying people off. But for an average American who's not in manufacturing, you really have to ask yourself, we lost the furniture industry, we lost the textile industry, and here's yet another blue-collar mid-America industry whose companies are all in these small Midwest towns, many of which, when the textile plant left, the schools suffered, the shops closed down, the city, the little town square went away, and they now have meth problems. I mean, because there's no jobs and there's no opportunity in these areas and people are leaving them. I mean, is it worth a whole nother industry that props up towns like that all over the middle of our country? Is it worth losing more and more and more of that kind of industry in America to put China on its ass or not? Because that is the collateral damage that's occurring as we speak.
You've had times in your life when you didn't have much. You had to sell your Ozzie Smith rookie baseball card for money when you were in school. You've had success in building your business. As a coaching the Manassas football team, you saw socioeconomic and racial divide. So how do you see money?
I'm probably weird on this, but I see money as a vehicle. It's what you ride up a social and socioeconomic ladder to provide more for yourself and your family. I don't collect it. I don't worship it. I don't revere it. I simply see it as a vehicle inside the institution of our society that allows you to climb the ladder. I also see it as a blessing, and I see the blessing of wealth as a responsibility to take care of that wealth in a responsible way and to also carve out a fairly significant portion of it to help those who aren't as fortunate as you. So money is a vehicle for you and your family to climb up the ladder, and it's also a vehicle to get off that perch that you find yourself on when you climb that ladder and get back down where you came from and spread it around to folks who need it. And there's a huge difference in a hand up and a hand out. And I'm not into writing checks, but I am into using whatever wealth you can accumulate in some portion of it to exact some measure of difference for people in our society and communities that desperately need it. It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle to help people. It's a vehicle to rise. It's a vehicle to open doors, to create more opportunity. It's just a vehicle.
When it comes to service, do you encourage the listener to immerse him or herself into a community in need like you did for 6 or 7 years?
I'm a football coach, so that fit. I don't know if I encourage people to do it like I did it, but I encourage people to do it in some way. And frankly, I think if you make a bunch of money and you've had opportunity to find financial success and you're doing very little to give back, I just think you're a selfish jerk. I don't have any time for you. I don't care if you have $3 billion and are considered by the press and the magazines and everybody else the coolest person in the world. If you're not doing something for someone else with the blessings that you've been given, I think you're just a jerk. I just think you're a selfish jerk, and I think you deserve to lose it all. How in the world can we drive around in our cities today and go over those overpasses where you see desperation and disenfranchisement and despair and think somebody ought to do something about that? The government has proven woefully inadequate. Who is somebody ought to do something? The very fact that you may be one of the people who have an income and have wealth or have money, you are the someone that ought to do something about that. I suggest you cock that rearview mirror over as you're driving over that overpass and look yourself in the face and say, I ought to do something about that. And I don't mean you're going to go in and change an entire neighborhood, but you can certainly find ways to work at food banks. You can find ways to teach reading in literacy classes. You can serve in soup kitchens. You can work inside your house of worship if you're faithful. You can go coach a football team. You can coach a basketball team. You can go to any public high school in this country and walk in the door and say, hey, you know, what does your theater arts department need? Oh my God, there's thousands of ways every day that we can help. And yes, I not only encourage your listeners to find some way to serve, but I will tell your listeners also, if you're not serving in some way, your life is not full. Your selfishness and conceit will eat you up from the inside out.
It sounds like it comes back to what you were saying, even about the political discussion, that one needs to be liberal and open-minded and be willing to talk to different people and go into different communities and figure out how one can help and how one can make an impact. Bill, I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
For me personally, if all four of my children are 50 years old and they've got some money for their retirement and they're healthy and they're happy and they have people in their lives that they love and they have people in their lives that love them and they wake up every day in the morning ready to roll and they've found some place in their world to serve and give back, then I've reached success. I don't need a house in the mountains. I don't need a beach house. I don't need a jet. I don't need any of that stuff. And I'm not saying that one day I won't buy some of that stuff if I want it. And if I've carved out enough of what I've done to help others, listen, don't get me wrong about any of this. I absolutely believe in exceptionalism, and I am unapologetic. If my business, when the trade wars are over and everything else, and if this business makes $4 or $5 billion 1 year, I'm not going to apologize to anybody for that. I work my ass off. I'm competitive. We're creative. I've surrounded myself with really quality, good people. I've trained them. I try to lead them. I try to treat them with respect. And if all of those things create $5 or $6 or $7 million one year and really good profits or a number of years, I'm apologizing to nobody for that. I am working every day to be exceptional, and I want everybody around me to be exceptional. So if that exceptionalism at work allows me to do more for my society and also buy my wife a house on the beach, I'm not going to apologize for that. I think all of that is fine. But I'm also saying it can't be just about that. It has to be about a more complete, balanced approach to your society and your life and your community and your children. I think the root of it all goes down to being a servant, being selfless, thinking about people other than yourself, and how you work to think about creative ways to have a lasting, positive measure of success for everyone around you.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thanks for sharing your story and your thoughts with us today. Before we part ways, what is the new book going to be about?
It's the subtitle. The title of it is Parents in the Hands of Angry Children. And the subtitle is 15 Surefire Ways to Screw Up Your Precious Little Angels. And each chapter is about some things that I think that our culture today is doing that is going to lead to more and more division and more difficulties in society because of the lessons that we're getting away from that I think are at our core as Americans. And so it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, obviously, satiristic look at some of the things we do as parents. And for instance, you know who Jesse Ventura is. Before he was a politician, he was a wrestler, and he always said, win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat. And when I was in high school, I thought that was hilarious, right? But obviously that flies in the face of everything we've been taught. You know, win if you can, lose if you must, but it's really not whether or not you win or you lose, it's how you play the game, right? So that basic fundamental, and then we're slapped in the face with how ridiculous that is. And of course, we all as parents would tell our children that's ridiculous. But now we've got 30 parents looking at 10 years in jail because they were willing to buy their children into universities because their children couldn't get into those universities on their own merit. And the lesson is, if I have enough money and enough clout, enough prestige in society, I can cheat my way into what I want. And then all of us are appalled by such a thing. All of us normal people aren't involved in that are appalled by such a thing. I mean, they're Jesse Ventura. Win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat. But let me ask you something. How many times have you told a little fib to your kid's coach who was 5 minutes late to practice so they didn't have to run the extra lap? Or how many times have you written a letter for your child not to have to go to school and told a little fib about that? Or those birthday parties, what narrative would we construct so we don't have to invite all of the kids? All I'm saying is, if you break it down to the little things in parenting, what are we really teaching our kids when we cheat, and even cheat just a little?
There's a tendency for it to start small, and then it kind of just grows.
That's it. So that's kind of one chapter, and it's a collection of chapters about that, not to be preachy, but just hopefully to remind the reader that certainly we can throw rocks at people in the public eye, but when you melt it down, I think we're all a little guilty of some of these things along the lines, and how of paramount importance it is for our children to see why those lessons matter.
Well, thank you. I really look forward to reading that book. Thank you, Coach Bill Courtney. I will put links in the show notes to the Oscar-winning documentary Undefeated, as well as your Against the Grain book, A Coach's Wisdom on Character, Faith, Family, and Love. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can follow you and find more?
Yeah, you can reach me at I am Coach Bill on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can go to www.coachbillcourtney.com, and it's my website. There's links to buy the book. You can buy Undefeated. You can read social media stuff there. And, you may get bored with it because a lot of it's just pictures of me and Lisa, but there's other stuff on there you might find you like.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you.
So what was your favorite inspired money moment? To me, Coach Bill is a guy who knows how to lead, how to win, and he'll be brutally honest with you. In my brief time chatting with him, I feel like he's the type of person that you want in your corner. All right, if you're going to press me for a specific moment, I'll say this. Don't be the person who says, someone should do something about that. You can be that someone. Think about how you can make a difference, how you can make an impact, and then go do it. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment or thoughts on today's topic, please share with us in the Inspired Moneymakers Facebook group. Find us at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens. Yeah.
Hi.
And now let's get inspired with Coach Bill Courtney.
Now let's get inspired with Coach Bill Courtney.
Oh, say thanks for listening, Inspired Moneymaker.
Thanks for listening, Inspired Moneymaker.
Perfect. I like it.
Now can I talk?
Almost.
Oh, come on.